clothing in ancient Greece primarily consisted of the chiton, peplos, himation, and chlamys. Ancient Greek men and women typically wore two pieces of clothing draped about the body, an undergarment and a cloak. Clothes were customarily homemade out of various lengths of rectangular linen or wool fabric with little cutting or sewing, and secured with ornamental clasps or pins and a belt or girdle. Pieces were generally interchangeable between men and women. While no clothes have survived from this period, descriptions exist in contemporary accounts and artistic depictions. Clothes were mainly homemade, and often served many purposes. Common clothing of the time was plain white, sometimes incorporating decorative borders. There is evidence of elaborate design and bright colors, but these were less common. History and types. Chiton. The chiton was a simple tunic garment of lighter linen that was worn by both genders and all ages. It consisted of a wide, rectangular tube of material secured along the shoulders and upper arms by a series of fasteners. Chitons typically fell to the ankles of the wearer, but shorter chitons were sometimes worn during vigorous activities by athletes, warriors or slaves. Often excess fabric would be pulled over a girdle or belt, which was fastened around the waist. To deal with the bulk, sometimes a strap or animationalista was worn around the neck, brought under the armpits, crossed in the back and tied in the front. A himation, or cloak, could be worn over top of the chiton. Peplos. A predecessor to the himation, the peplos was a square piece of cloth that was originally worn over the chiton. The top third of the cloth was folded over and pinned at both shoulders, leaving the cloth open down one side. Sometimes the peplos was worn alone as an alternative form of chiton. As with the chiton, often a girdle or belt would be used to fasten the folds at the waist. Himation. The himation was a basic outer garment worn over the peplos or chiton. It consisted of a heavy rectangular material passing under the left arm and secured at the right shoulder. The cloak would be twisted around a strap that also passed under the left arm and over the right shoulder. A more voluminous himation was worn in cold weather. The himation could be pulled up over the head to cover the wearer when they were overcome by emotion or shame. Calamus. The chlamys was a seamless rectangle of woolen material worn by men for military or hunting purposes. It was worn as a cloak and fastened at the right shoulder with a brooch or button. The chlamys was typical Greek military attire from the 5th to the 3rd century BC. Undergarments. Women often wore a strophon, the bra of the time, under the garments. The strophon was a wide band of wool or linen wrapped across the breasts and tied between the shoulder blades. Men and women sometimes wore triangular loincloths, called perizoma, as underwear. Fasteners and buttons. Since clothing was rarely cut or sewn, fasteners and buttons were often used to keep garments in place. Small buttons, pins and brooches were used. Large pins, called peroni, were worn at the shoulders, facing down, to hold the chiton or peplos in place. Footwear. Women and men typically wore sandals, slippers, soft shoes, or boots. At home they usually went barefoot. Jewelry. Ornamentation. In the form of jewelry, elaborate hairstyles and makeup was common for women. Small gold ornaments would be sewn onto the clothing and would glitter as they moved. Fabrics. Ancient Greek clothing was made with silk, linen and most often, wool. The production of fabric was a long and tedious process, making ready-made clothing expensive. It was socially accepted that textile making was primarily a women's responsibility, and the production of high-quality textiles was regarded as an accomplishment for women of high status. Once made, the cloth was rarely cut. The seamless rectangles of fabric were draped on the body in various ways with little sewing involved.